Today's subject regarding the entertainment industry's obsession with exploiting nostalgic properties is going to center on the matter of how fans respond and why myself try to stay as level-headed as possible. I'm sure we're all made aware of the drama that has come out of 2018 regarding the way fans handle not liking a sequel, remake, adaptation, or spin-off of their favorite works. A lot of spreading of the hashtag #KilledMyChildhood movement, among other things. Yes, my discussion here can pertain to a lot of art and media not based on a pre-existing work, but for now I'm focusing on existing fan bases and anything based on something they love. I don't want us to repeat the same mistakes that in 2019, but unfortunately, the real world just isn't that kind. I'm not going to pretend that certain movies or TV shows based on or following up to others that I hold close to me don't pinch a nerve with me. I mean, it's basically just part of the human nature to be reminded of things we are more familiar with, and they do, at least subconsciously, have influence on our final judgments. It is indeed true that I myself am guilty of fan raging, but I try to be restrained with it as much as possible, and determine what is appropriate when and where. But the sheer rabidness of several fan bases nowadays has gotten to the point where it's so bad that I'd rather rewatch my most despised sequels, remakes, adaptations, and spin-offs than watch certain people trashing them. In the earlier half of this decade, it may have been cool to rant and rave in extreme hyperbole on certain pieces of media for fun, but in these more recent years, you can't get off scot-free with saying, my opinions aren't hurting anyone, given how everything we've seen in 2018 indicates that they clearly have potential to do so. Sarah Z recently made a fantastic video essay that discusses bad media criticism and the effect it has on the industry. And yes, we should be allowed to vent our frustrations as a catharsis from time to time, but it should never be used as a means to attack or demean anyone. Referring to Star Wars for a minute as an oh-so-classic example of this. I myself have never had any personal vendetta against Star Wars itself. I'm honestly just a casual viewer when it comes to them. But I've pretty much grown to almost despise even hearing it brought up nowadays. Not just because of what's been happening in the case of Last Jedi, but largely because I went to school with some of those fanatical, puritanical Star Wars fans who had no qualms about slinging mud at anyone who wasn't a hardcore fan, about as much as the mud that they would sling at the Phantom Menace. Even if they weren't the type of people who would harass Kelly Marie Tran off of Twitter or Instagram, go with a petition to remake The Last Jedi, they would gladly be disingenuous enough to harbor the no true Scotsman fallacy of, you're not a true fan unless you appreciate the franchise for the same reasons that I do. In fact, to all those who say that they hate when people start off a controversial opinion with, you're going to hate me for this, yes, indeed, there is a legitimate reason why people are compelled to say that. Because while it does sound simple enough to let opinions be opinions, we apparently live in an era where that's too much to ask, where people are all too content to insult or guilt jump people for having differing opinions. And even when reviewers say that they advocate respecting anyone who likes something that they don't, there are several times where their actions and words will frequently indicate that they have trouble following through on that principle. Even some of the worst movies ever made have at least one person somewhere in the world who will defend it, but you still do not cross the line of insulting them for liking it. Instead, the approach should be, why do you like it? And maybe you can debunk some of their points, I know I certainly have, but you can learn more about them as individuals, and that can help you form a better conclusion and more knowledge about them as a person. I understand why fans tend to get uptight and protective of the things they love. Before the internet became a popular platform to voice your opinion, people were generally dismissive of the voice of common fans, and having full discussion about the fiction that we consumed was just thought to be a waste of time, and something you eventually grew out of, especially if you were into animation, like me, in a culture where animation is still looked down on as something for kids. Now that the internet is so accessible and gives more people a voice, it grants such new privileges such as giving the opportunity for underrated works to be talked about more, and even for creators behind the works to be appreciated at last. It also allows for more individuals to inspire one another personally and creatively, and it bridges for contacts and so much more. But unfortunately, it also leaves the floor open to spread potential conspiracy theories, as I've come to realize. It's okay to doubt the quality of something before it comes out and to be fearful about the road it might lead down. But spreading words to try and destroy them is something else entirely. I fully admit that I've fallen prey to siding with reviewers' preemptive judgments in the past, but the kinds of controversies we've seen, like responses to the reboots of Thundercats Roar and She-Ra before they even came out, as well as the already existing ones to Teen Titans Go or the Powerpuff Girls 2016, make animation fans look just as childish as animation haters perceive them and the medium itself to be. And instances like those infamous Teen Titans Go episodes that existed just to say that the critics' responses were totally wrong and unjustified certainly didn't do any favors to anyone's image. Apart from how raging tends to drive fan bases savage, there are two major reasons I personally don't like it. First, one sequel, remake, or adaptation or spin-off is always going to be worse than another in some way. There's a lot to be talked about regarding which is the definitive worst, as much as what the worst movie, book, show, or video game ever made is. But I think trying to start up a debate over which something is doing more disservice to someone else's nostalgia or childhood is a trap in and of itself. Plus, the mileage on what constitutes for a good or bad spin-off very likely varies from person to person. And frankly, I'd rather have the opportunity to have discussion about the pros and cons of the result rather than a reason to be at each other's throats about it. Second, most creators don't set out to make a bad product, original or based on something else. I can only imagine what it must have been like for Kelly Marie Tran to finally live the dream of having a 1 in a million chance to be a part of a franchise that others would kill to be a part of, only to have this be what it amounted to. It'd be less living the dream and more living the nightmare. Speaking as someone who is out to pursue a career in art and entertainment, if this is the kind of relationship I were to have with my audience, then I'd rather spend the rest of my days working at a crappy dead-end job than getting rich putting my talents to good use. But that's the thing to keep in mind, that behind the camera, page, recording booth, or what have you, is a person, same as you. Yes, a person who has put him or herself out there for the rest of the world to see and have their own opinions on, but a person nonetheless. Don't say anything to them online that you wouldn't say to their faces. Sometimes it's a case of what you're stuck to work with, and there are more than enough instances where the people behind the certain despised products admitted to resenting having worked on them, or at the very least were ashamed of the outcome. Heck, you might be surprised to discover how often writers are committed to doing their homework and how their decisions might make more sense than you give them credit for. When listening to various reviewers reviewing what they consider to be a bad sequel, adaptation, or what have you, one comment I've heard from some that strikes me in particular is a claim that the people who made it clearly hated the original. Leaving aside the hyperbole argument, those are some very serious accusations to be throwing around. I'd say that the argument that creators hated whatever they were adapting or following up to might have some merit if the final product featured such things as A. Using Ron the Death Eater or other writing tactics that you see in bad online fanfictions, B. Multiple jabs at the original and not in the playful way, but rather the condescending way, or C. Giving immense anticipation to their fan base only to deliberately deprive them what they were hoping for in the end. There is no shortage of sequels or adaptations I don't like and don't agree with the choices made in the making of them, but being someone who has done his best to be personally honest as possible, I did not believe that most of them were made by people who hated them. There are cases like the Gem and the Holograms movie that had to be exceptionally low and underhanded to purposely insult the show and its fans, but I would not go and carelessly make a claim like that at the risk of it being potentially harmful and false, as I do not believe that is the case for most stories. Not the Jurassic Park sequels or reboots, not any of the recent Star Wars movies or its prequels, not Disney's string of direct-to-video sequels or live-action remakes, not most reboots on Cartoon Network or other channels nowadays, not even The Last Airbender movie. Yes, I said it. Yes, M. Night Shyamalan is responsible for much of what was bad about the movie, like the characterizations and the decision to cram all the episodes of the first season into an hour and a half, but Nickelodeon was responsible for things like the whitewashing and the mismanaging of the effects budget, and no, it doesn't make the movie any better, and me trying to see things from the perspective of the people behind a product isn't going to be the deciding factor of how much I like or dislike the product itself, but it will most likely influence how I respond to it. And saying I like one or two things from it does not automatically suffice for being a reasonable reviewer, because in the end, it's just another way of plausible dishonesty and disingenuousness. It may ultimately just be a mask that people use to disguise the fact that they're watching the film with a built-in grudge, and making it their mission to hate it. I'm giving this a chance, you may say. but in reality, you're not, and you're just pushing your own agenda on it. At least from what I can see. I won't try to accuse anyone. I also see it as a plausible red herring or get out of jail free card for when a critic ignores or misconstrues details of a piece of media when critiquing it, like, if I say one or two nice things about it, then it will excuse the details I got wrong or failed to do research on. No, it doesn't. No more than it's just my opinion or my reviews are satire will. That having been said, it's not like I can't see how serious consequences can arise from a property you love being maligned by a bad sequel, adaptation, or reboot. That's why, with me being a creator, my major concerns have less to do with my personal attachment to the properties and more about how they are being treated and how they affect the business aesthetic side of my field of interest. Basically, for me, what it comes down to is this. My discontent is rooted less in this killed part of my childhood and more in I really love this work, it shaped my life in a significant way, and I think it deserves better than what it's gotten, as do the fans and the creators behind the original. And to be frank, we are currently spoiled with the quality control that is going into the products that we're getting nowadays, even the ones we didn't necessarily ask for. And who knows? Our reactions to the sequels and remakes we really like now might sour over time the same way our reactions to the Phantom Menace did. My suggestions for how to make a civil, fair judgment of something you consider a terrible follow-up or adaptation is basically the same for how you evaluate pretty much anything that's more or less original. Here are 7 steps that I think will more or less put you on the right track. 1. Try not to put so much stock in what you expect from something and try to evaluate it more for what it is than what you want it to be. Don't lower your expectations and be prepared to encounter at least one thing you might not like, but try to look at how well the overall product holds up. 2. Express your feelings first and then try to be collective. Let the rage out up front, even potentially as a means of comedy, but then put it to the wayside and explain yourself as cohesively as you can. 3. Try to detach your personal biases from it, and try to keep comparisons to other works to a minimum, even if it's something that the project in question is based on. If that's hard or impossible to do, please elaborate. 4. If you encounter someone who has a differing opinion from you, try to find out where they're coming from and see if any good can come out of finding that out. And make the genuine effort to fully understand the other person's reasoning before you condemning it as dumping on it for the sake of dumping on it. 5. Try to find out why a product took the direction that it did. Criticize certain writing and creative decisions, but don't attack or curse the people behind them. 6. By all means, call creators and distributors out for their mistakes, but take them as just that. Mistakes. Something that they can own up to and learn from. Not that they always do, of course, but they can't if you give off a venomous vibe that indicates that you're only interested in your own motives rather than the bettering of a product they're making. And finally, keep in mind that for every person who does something terrible to a work that you love, deliberately or not, there is always someone somewhere else trying to make sure that that product you love gets its fair due and gets a decent audience. With all that being said, feel free to leave in a comment if there's anything you would like to share or if there's anything that I need to be corrected on. If there are multiple things I need to be corrected on, by all means make your own commentary. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you next time.